What's up, Capwatids? We're back.
It's your favorite ates, and welcome to season 4.
For those just tuning in, we are two Filipinx soul sisters on a decolonizing journey, currently based on Turtle Island, aka North America.
We met each other again this lifetime in a healing circle, and that's how the Babaylan Bruja Book Club podcast was born.
This season, we did something a little different by engaging in a series of study break conversations with honored artists, authors, and thought leaders in the Filipinx diaspora.
We enjoyed connecting with Kapwa with different perspectives and viewpoints, and we're so excited to extend these conversations to you. Okay, welcome back, Babaylan Brujas. Before we get into our interview today, as always, we want to take a moment to ground. So, if you are ready, I invite you to take a pause and drop into your body and become fully present to this space. If it is safe for you and if you feel comfortable, we invite you to close your eyes, straighten your spine, and direct your focus to your breath. If you aren't able to close your eyes safely, I invite you to really tune into the space around you. Take a few deep inhales in, extending your belly out, and exhales, bringing your belly in. Once more, inhale, hold, and exhale. One more time, inhale, hold, and exhale slowly. I invite you to continue to connect to your breath deeply and slowly in your own timing. I invite you to connect into your body and into this moment. I invite you into this present moment and ask if you can allow yourself to feel what it's like to be here and now. And as we begin our conversation, we'd like to thank God, Bathala Creator, for another gathering. In gratitude, we acknowledge our benevolent ancestors and invite all these forces to guide and protect this conversation today. We also thank the ancestors of the lands Stephanie and I currently occupy, knowing we cannot do our own remembrance without remembering them. For me, that is the mound builders that are the Hopewell and Adena people in Ohio. For Stephanie, that is the Bay Miwok Yokut people in the Inland Bay area of California. With gratitude, we also acknowledge your presence, Kapwatid, your energy and your light, no matter wherever and whenever you're tuning in.
All right, everyone, welcome. We are so excited. We have an exciting guest today, Miss Trina. It's been a minute since we wanted to have her presence here. And so we're gonna allow Trina to introduce herself, let us know, where you come from, where you're important, what lands you're on, and just let the folks speak, and then we'll dive in the interview.
All right. Oh gosh. Sometimes I don't know how to answer this question anymore because I'm just so flowy doing the spirit work and stuff. But I'm Trina. I hold on to the titles for now as a life coach, but I do a lot of spiritual work, ancestral healing, intuition building. Those are the main things that I do now. But in a past life, I have been a Catholic minister. I've been in the Catholic Church leading for about more or less 2 decades. And we'll talk about more of that transition later. So now I'm just here doing spiritual work wherever, allowing and guiding people into their path. With the way the world is turning, we need people to be in their purpose. And so that's what I'm called to do, is to help make people take that leap.
Yeah. It's crazy. I think a lot of the brujas and brujos and brooks, whatever you can identify with, I've met are all online, and it was just such a lovely coincidence that Trina was like literally my neighbor. So I had the pleasure to connect with her in person, and then learned a little about her history. And I already knew today was gonna be potent, y'all, because Amy has shared her some kind of background. I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk. Like, I need you to meet Amy. And just to hear, two very renowned women in my life who I have, been pleasure to cross paths with, and learn about how y'all were in the church, like literally immersed in it, and you left. And so today's tea is gonna be a little hot, everybody, especially those
Yeah.
who also have similar backgrounds listening in. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think we're dropping this on Easter weekend. So I don't know that feels significant too. You know, that as a former minister leader in the church as well, this feels significant. So
Yeah.
I guess let's just dive in. Let's just dive in. So Trina, I was just wondering if you can share your church story, like your background, your if you grew up a church kid or how much time you spent, what connected you there, and then what kind of led you out of the church, I guess.
There's so many versions, different versions I can talk about this. Um, but first, I, where do I start? So my dad's side is all kinds of Christian denominations, not Catholic. Um, but my grandpa, he was a missionary. He helped missionaries in the Philippines go island to island.
Mm,
So when I was in ministry, I was like, oh, I'm very much more like my grandpa than I realized until
yeah.
I didn't realize that until I got older.
Mm-hmm.
And they have so many stories about like what they did and going to like different provinces and things. But ultimately, he left because of corruption in his church.
Mm,
And so you will see how more and more
Ooh.
as the story unfolds, I'm still very much in that way, like my grandpa. On my mom's side, they're Catholic, kind of go by the rules, the structure, the colonial programming, even. Um, but they weren't heavily Catholic. They were like more the what we call C&E Catholics, the Christian and Easter Catholics, right? Like
Yeah.
I got my sacraments now, I'm good to go, right? Like we're
CEO
good.
Christian.
And
What do you say? Christmas, Easter only. That's what my priest would say.
yeah,
yes,
we would call
they're
that
those.
submarine Christians. Like they just pop their head up
Oh,
and then
The
I
they
know that
submarine
one.
Christians, that's another word.
yeah.
Uh so it was kind of like that, but I also don't blame them because in that time, their generation, I mean, there was so much scandal that has come out of that generation, right? Like why would we trust the church? They didn't protect children. Um, when
Mhm.
did they ever?
Right? Oh.
Like if you know your history, you know that's right. And if you're denying it, you don't know. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Um, also, okay, that's the background. That's where I came from. But I actually initiated getting involved with the
Okay.
church. So I got my first communion and then we stopped going. And I'm just as a kid, I kind of wondered why, but it wasn't really that important because church isn't fun to kids, most
Right.
kids, depending
Yeah.
on your church. And so like it never bothered me. Moving into like adolescent years, I moved away from my hometown. So I grew up in like Daly City, South City,
Nice.
Filipino Central. So I grew up with lots of Filipinos. It wasn't so much of a big thing if we brought rice to lunch,
Right.
right? Maybe you still get questions, but it wasn't like how Filipinos in the diaspora would experience that in the wider
Mm-hmm.
US and beyond, right? And so I grew up never having to question that part of me. There are still some ways, but there was more of a protection being in community with Filipinos in that
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that shifted when I started going to a predominantly white school in my adolescent years. And there was a lot of family stuff going on. And I didn't know if God was really real, right? I just knew the stories of the Bible. Um, and that's when I started like really dealing without knowing because our generation also when we were younger, we didn't know the importance of mental health. That wasn't a
Yeah.
thing we talked
Right.
about.
Mhm.
But that's when I started dealing with like depression, anger, rage. And I was just like, God, if you're real, this was my prayer. Either don't wake me up tomorrow,
Mm.
or um, fix my situation, bring me back home.
Mm-hmm.
I have never experienced like microaggressions until then, but I knew that it was wrong. I could feel it, even though I didn't have the language,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there was just so much built up that I could not put words to at that time. I was like, just take me, God. Like, if you're there, fix it.
Yeah.
Because as a child, you don't have power to make those decisions for yourself.
Right. Right.
So I toughed it out. I still kept in touch with like my childhood friends, and they were talking about like how great and how fun their experience with church was. And I'm like, really? And I started kind of laughing, but they're, no, you'll really like it. Like, we talked about things, we did games, but we also talked about things and we cried. And my like, ooh, I'm a Leo, but I'm also a Cancer moon, Pisces rising, right? I'm like, crying? Tell me more.
Got it.
Let's talk.
So,
Right. I'm still like that. This is why I do the work that I do.
Same. Same.
Get your tissues. But it piqued my interest, and I knew, this is how I knew there was a God at 13.
Mm.
I switched schools. Someone snitched on me that I didn't live in the district, and hey, it worked out.
Yeah. Wow.
It worked out. I moved back. My mom wasn't happy about it, but I was able to reconnect with friends.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Filipino community, the church is like a important pillar. So I got involved and did the crying things and the religious things, and then I volunteered and did everything under the sun I could do in the church: choir, Eucharistic minister, ugh, retreats, youth. And then I end up going into the leadership
Yeah.
track, right? And then start training up leaders, start training up ministers, advising ministers, da, 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 da. And then I have kids, and that stops. And then 2020 happens, and here we are. And keep in mind, I'm an ethnic studies kid, so you are not going to like bypass history with me when it comes to
Yes.
the church.
Yeah.
And the way I was able to manage those two was that we're in a better place pre 2020, right?
Mhm.
That was always kind of like the response to my questions. Well, what my question was, one, I've walked with civil rights
Mhm.
activists in the 60s, people who walked with Martin Luther King. I met Congressman John Lewis. I met folks from the Little Rock Nine, and they walked with us for 10 days. I was part of a trip.
Oh
And it was a
wow.
privilege and an honor. It was called Sojourn to the Past.
Yeah.
They're
where'd
still
you go?
operating in some ways. Sorry.
Where'd you go?
We went to, it was 10 days, but we were all over the South. We went to
Uh,
like museums for civil rights. We even went to the Confederate Museum. We went to grave sites. We went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Like, we were
Yeah.
in Ebenezer Baptist Church, right? Like,
Yeah.
that again, just similar like to the Filipino community. The church was the pillar, and they helped me see my faith, that our faith could be used for good and for justice.
Mhm.
Right. And
Mhm.
so that was the first one. It wasn't the Filipino community that made that connection for me. It was Black people. And I will
Mm.
always acknowledge that
Mm.
my activism and intersection with faith is to the Black community.
Mm.
And they help inform and help me understand my responsibility
Mm.
as a believer, or just
Mhm.
anyone with a heart. That is our responsibility to each other, to stand up for injustice. So when I ask these questions of the Catholic Church and the Filipino community, It was very Fox Newsy. Like, but we have a priest, a Black African priest. We're good. We're in a good place. Like, he exists. It
Right.
exists.
Right.
And so I just could never,
What
just
questions were
didn't
you
feel right.
asking? Just curious. Like, what questions were you asking?
Well, what more could we do, right? Like, what more could we as the leadership do for the Black community or for
Yeah.
poverty beyond charity, right? And it
Mhm.
never really went beyond that.
Okay.
But I had deeper questions for 2020, right? And we were all, well, one, mass was shut down. We're not allowed to do that because of lockdown. And I kind of chuckled because over the years in my time, knowing my background, um, and my love for social justice, I would have people I looked up to and mentored me when I talked about, like, oh, maybe we could go to a protest, or maybe we can do these things together as a group, as young adults or youth. And one of the responses I'll never forget is that they said, protests don't work.
What?
And I'm like, that's interesting. But then I held on to that because, again, I didn't have words. I had the words of activism and the words of faith, but I never was able to, like, marry the two
Mm.
as a Catholic. And they just lived in two separate worlds of me. And it just never really felt right. And then 2020 happened, and I started seeing that schism was by design.
Mm.
That schism was by design because if
Tell
the
us, tell
Catholic
us, tell us more. Just like schism by design for folks like listening in. What do you mean by that?
if the Catholic Church acknowledged that Black lives didn't just matter, but were sacred,
Yeah.
then we would have to really do some internal digging,
Yeah.
right? And it would rock people's realities so much because it would require us to give up power. It would require not just the Catholic Church, but all Christian churches for reparations. It would be undeniable. And this is where we are today because we cannot wrap our minds around not just American chattel slave history, but the history of colonialism, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. Baby, the church would go down.
Mm.
And but
Preach.
you know what? We don't have to do anything
Yeah.
because they are telling on themselves right
Mm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even realize
Yeah.
how much hate and actually
Complicit.
generational trauma
I
that
think
they're passing
complicitness,
on.
like
Sorry.
complicit. I was just saying, adding in complicitness too, like just, and that speaks to the Asian community in general, right? So the intersectionality of that, those cultures, and that, we're, equals privilege, and that's,
Yes. And as Asians, we benefit from that, right?
yeah.
Because of our proximity to whiteness.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so they
Girl.
will never. But what
Yeah.
they also don't know is that my family is very mixed. I have Arab family members, I have Black family members, I have poly family members, I have Latino family members. So you are not going to tell me that Black Lives Matters is political.
Mm-hmm.
My goddaughter is Black. You're not ever going to tell me I'm
Yeah.
going to make this space safe for her. And
Yeah.
if I can't make this world safe for my family members, then this is not a space for them.
And
And
that's
then
the whole
also not a space for me and my children.
Yes. Yes.
that's the whole thing. I think just chiming in about like Asian Americans, who the proximity of whiteness and model minority myth, like at the end of the day, white people gonna look at us like, if you're not white, you're you're colored, you're a person of color, you're not, you know what I mean, you're not. And so I think it's interesting, there's no term at this time, if y'all know, but how Asian Americans, Filipino Americans in particular, they that white supremacy, I call it psychosis,
Yes.
right, that no matter what, if you're not white, you're black, like you're going to be considered a person of color, and they're
Yeah.
not going to look at your body as quote supreme. But I digress. I just wanted to chime that in because I feel like that's also part of the programming, or why people don't take more activism, as you were so eloquently preaching about.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
It's valid. There's a lot of layers playing out.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I saw in 2020 as well. I was already out of the church just newly, but that's one of the things that I saw in 2020 was just how uncomfortable the people that I knew in church, how uncomfortable they became once, there were Black Lives Matter came on the scene, and like there's a lot more uptick in activism in the general world, and they became so incredibly uncomfortable. And I think, just to echo what you said, Trina, that they don't want to look at it, because then they have to really, really consider themselves, their actual person. And they always get defensive, like, well, I didn't mean anything, I'm innocent, but they have to take that away and put it on themselves, like what really is going on. So yeah, there's a lot of fear there. um
Yeah.
yeah,
and
so
denial, I think, and
mhm,
just chosen ignorance. And
yeah,
I don't
And this is what makes it hard because I was in it, right, in
yeah,
2020. I wasn't really ready to leave right away, but
mm,
that's what started the unraveling,
I
yes,
see.
pull the
right?
thread,
You're like,
Is
this
that
ain't right. This isn't right. Yeah.
I could no longer make excuses.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
Because the hard part for me, what didn't get me to leave church right away, knowing what I know about ethnic studies and our history, right, is that I was always kind of able to bring it back and rationalize
yeah,
that we're in a better place. Things that, look, we
mhm,
have these policies, we have, um, but in the end, it was just like, well, if things are better and we can't agree that just matter was the bare minimum, when actually all lives, well, I don't even want to say all, that Black lives matter, were like Black lives were sacred. What does that say about me? Because you were talking about like we had to come to terms with ourselves. I had to come to terms with
yeah,
myself first.
yeah, yeah,
How did I perpetuate in my teachings?
yeah,
I had to do my own examine. What did I teach that was taught to me that perpetuated anti-Blackness, that
mm,
perpetuated violence?
mm,
Because there's a
Right.
lot of teachings in the
mm,
Right.
Catholic Church that justifies violence
mm,
because it was used under empire for generations.
yeah, yeah,
To tell even young children and talk about the crucifixion of Jesus without mentioning murdered by the state is an incomplete truth, right? If we're not acknowledging that Jesus was murdered by the state because he went up against the Roman Empire, what does that mean about George Floyd? What does that mean about our activists?
Ooh,
What does that
girl.
oh,
mean
Yep. Try it.
about recently Ryan Gaynor? What
Mhm.
does that mean about our society?
yeah,
Because I was taught when we growing up that if there were more Christians, this world would be a better place, but now it's even
mm,
worse. So tell
mm,
me,
Mm.
where are our Christians? Where are our good Christians? Or is this what good Christians do? This isn't it something I still have to come to terms with.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that I resonate with that a lot. I still feel, I don't know what the word is. Probably shame. It's probably shame about how much I was complicit. What I taught children, right? I
Mm.
mentored
Yes.
kids, and I had to really wrestle with that and like repent of using a church word, but repent. You know what I mean? Realize it, recognize it, call it out for what it is inside of my own self, and then now that I know better, do better. So yeah. Yeah. So what was the catalyst, or what do you remember a point in time where you were like, you know what, I can't, I've got to go? And what did that process look like for you of like stepping out of
Um,
that space?
from 2020 to 2021, I had to. I was trying to negotiate with myself and with the church.
Yeah.
Like, well, if they're willing to hold this kind of space for us, maybe I can stay. I was trying to find ways where I could stay within my conscience, right? To
Yeah.
stay
Oh,
in my home church. I was still
oh.
negotiating, and that took a year, and
Yeah.
then 2
Yeah.
years to heal. Um, and in that year, it was like, because most of this was virtual, and that was really hard to have like conversations with leadership because they're just like dodgy. My church was going through transitions of leadership also. I was just coming back into ministry
Mm.
after being away because I had kids. They also don't make ministry really accessible for parents, let alone mothers. So that was just another layer for another conversation. But
Can you
when
tell
I
us why, like briefly? I just want to, because me and you are both mothers,
yeah,
and you're both shake. I see I in agreement. So, like, how has ministry not catered to motherhood?
where is there a space for us? Like I remember, oh my
Right.
God, how do you get out? It takes me like 3 hours to get ready for 1 hour of church with the bottle, the diaper bag, all of that, right? But my son was also, he wasn't good with crowds. So it was just easier at a point I had to realize like I couldn't just drag him around like my baby doll. I had
Hmm.
to be responsive. And
Yeah.
only place for me in church was what they called the crying room, and it's a side chapel.
Girl.
Because where
Yep.
everybody's baby is crying. Like, what are you getting out of church except for
Yep.
stress?
Yep. Yep.
So I'm like, no wonder they call it the crying room because I want to cry right now.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. I remember nursing in between services. I led worship, so there were two services, and I would get there before everybody. And, then I would lead worship, and then my husband would come with the baby, hand my daughter to me. I'd go nurse her. I hand her back to my husband, and then go on stage. And and
That's so.
I think too they don't cater to women because there's or to mothers specifically to be in ministry because it's patriarchal as well. So a lot of patriarchy, there's a lot of hierarchy, and there's a lot of shame.
Mhm.
There's a lot of shame that that you feel as a woman in leadership because the thing in the back of your head is that you don't want to make your brothers in Christ sin or tempt them, you know what I mean, even though you're not doing anything, but just the fact that you're there might be a cause for that, you know so it's you feel that anyway, and maybe if you don't have language for that, you're just not gonna feel welcome, you know so
That's
Yes.
crazy. I love hearing both your stories about not having space.
Hmm.
But then when you're like giving to the church and you're sacrificing your energy, that's welcome. And to that, like when I was in policy work, um, I remember I was advocating for a breastfeeding space in the church. I was like,
yeah.
mothers don't have private spaces to breastfeed. So I went to a council meeting, and I remember sitting in a boardroom with like, there were women there. There's like two or three, and priests and pastors and stuff. And I was proposing the policy. I was like, I found a location. Like, this is what we can do. I need you to approve signage and all that stuff. And I remember it was like the assistant priest or whatever, a deacon. He chimed in. He was like, "Well, why can't a mother like feed the baby before church? Why do they need?" And thankfully, I was feeling hot inside because I was like, "Bro, like you're missing the mark, right?"
Yeah.
So thankfully, one of the council members, the woman, spoke up, and she's like, "Well, you can't tell a baby when to eat. Like, a baby's gonna eat when a baby wants to eat." And I just in that moment I was like, wow, the ignorance of some of the men in society, especially those that are in spiritual leadership positions. It blew my
it's
mind.
It's a mirror of our government here in America, where white men are making policies and rules and saying what is allowed and what is not allowed for women when they have no experience and of being a woman. So
Yep.
Yeah.
it's the same.
And like when I was in the church and I became transitioning into motherhood, no one from church, out of all the years that I gave, right? And the relationships I built, no one checked on me. And if they did, it was like, when are you coming back?
Yeah.
And so I wasn't fully able to process that until years later.
Yeah.
But respectfully, what the hell does a priest have to tell me about being a mom?
Mm-hmm.
Like on Sunday from the pulpit, what are you going to tell me about the realities of being a mom? What do you have to give me? There's no one in the Catholic Church that can speak to my situation because they won't let women up on the pulpit. And I had to realize when I made that transition, when I was trying to negotiate, there was never going to be a space for me, for women like me, because I am not the meek Proverbs 31 women that they talked about. And I always knew that. I always knew that. That fire in me would never allow me. My ancestors would never allow me.
Ooh, what's Proverbs 31 for the peoples?
I forget these things, but it's pretty much outline like what a good godly woman is.
Oh,
And a good godly woman is silent. And I will never.
allow the people who are listening to know that we have rolled our eyes. We're not tapping into visuals. We are. The silence there was us rolling our eyes. Okay. So,
Right.
Yes.
Ooh,
So
fire. Yeah.
So
Y'all,
2020 had you is that when you left the church or started the process? I know it does
well,
take a while it's a
a
process.
good part of my ministry, even though I worked with a lot of young adults and youth adults, the thing that always made me different was my connection with God. My connection with God out of the Trinity was not God the Father. It was not Jesus. Jesus was an example for me, but it was always for me spirit. It was always spirit. So when I operated in like Filipino charismatic communities as well, and I became a go-to for these young people. Like, how do I know if God is speaking to me? How do I know? The voice of God, intuition, your higher self, they're all the same to me. The voice of your ancestors, it's all coming from the same place. But that's not what I was told growing up in the church, right? Like, oh, that might be like the devil. How will you know? But if you're so in tune with yourself and with your relationship with your higher power, and this is a gift my grandparents had given me, my grandpa who did the ministry work with the missionaries, he had always said, it doesn't matter what people do. What matters is your relationship with God. And if that's intact, everything will be fine. And so
shout out to your grandpa, real quick.
he's one of my guides. And I hold on to that because he made it so simple early on. And when Catholics were worried about the sacraments and the rosary and the prayers and the traditions, I was just like, well, if it's going to help me in my relationship with God, that's what we're going to do. So how did I know it was time to leave? Was because I had a relationship with God. I had a vision that I was trying to get through the front doors of my church, but they were locked. And I was like crying and like trying to open it. And I felt God's hand in that vision turn me around. And my church overlooks my city. And you could see the ocean and everything. And God's hand pushed me forward. And he's like, that's your church. Now go. And God kicked me out. And I cried. I cried. And it took a while for me to process because I know what that meant. And I had to accept it. And I told all the people that I was working with, I said, I can't do this anymore because it just felt like fighting. It wasn't working. Right.
Wasn't working.
I said what I said and I said what I said. That's it. And so it's now their responsibility for the people that I was working with and for the higher ups to do what they want with that, because that's not going to lay on my conscience. And I had to come to terms with that. I've reached my point. There was nowhere else for me to go or grow. And God was saying, this is where you're going to grow and this is where you're going to be the most useful. And you know what? That time, once I made that announcement, at the end of the year, our youth group does kind of like an awards thing and they asked me to come. but they also gave me the highest honor that I was never expecting.
Mm.
Um, and that award in our youth group, what that means is that you did the most that year, and they wanted to recognize you. And that usually goes to like the youth minister or like the youth leaders, right? So I was never like, that was not ever on my mind. But for what I was doing with the youth virtually and having those conversations that our leadership didn't want to have with them,
Mm.
that is why.
Like what? Like what? What would you? What were you?
Things around social justice,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
also talking about mental health. Like
Yes.
we were there in the trenches with them, but also that they saw me. I'm honored that they saw me as someone that felt deserved that honor in that time. Because
Mm.
honestly, I would have just been like, give it to one of your leaders.
Mhm.
But they decided to give it to me. It's almost like the Kids' Choice Award.
Ooh, that
So
is
you worked with youth.
powerful.
You worked with youth from like for like a just getting like a visual of like what you were doing.
The
So you
youth
were
youth ministry, it was youth ministry, but I was advising the youth
ah
ministry at that time. So I was like helping them formulate their systems, right? And then the lockdown happened, and then we were just holding space.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
then the youth minister didn't know how to hold space for all the social justice questions. So that
ah.
summer we did a teaching
Can
that
I ask a
was
question?
not really, the leadership was not excited about that. But yeah,
Yeah. What were the top like three big takeaways that the youth were asking and needing from you during that time?
why are our elders so silent, or why is the church so
Ooh.
silent? That's number
Okay.
one. That was the number one question. Two is, how can people do this? How can people get away with this? And
Mhm.
three, our community, there we are realizing our community has to deal with their anti-blackness.
Mm. Mm.
They knew all of this was wrong, but they were trying to understand why people were justifying or trying to silence them and their peers, of
Mhm.
wanting to have conversations but pushing it to the side or
Yeah.
saying at a later time.
Yeah.
But this generation, millennials and Gen Z, this is not the time anymore to hold things off.
Facts.
We are at a crucial crux in everything,
Yep.
including our relationship to the land.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
this like pureness and curiosity has been instilled in these generations for a reason. It's to protect
Mhm.
all of us.
Mhm.
And for the people who are not wanting to have those conversations, you're part of the old paradigm. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye, Karen. Bye, Felicia.
Really, that's really it.
Yeah.
Pretty clear cut for the young folks. And that's why, you see the things with the ban on TikTok and algorithm things and Instagram with what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
young people can make a change.
Mhm.
Yep.
I remember our generations growing up, they said that the children are the future. So that kept delaying our leadership.
Mm.
Yes.
Cue Whitney
Yes.
Houston. I hear her in my head right now.
You know, they are our future, but they're here right now and they have
Yeah.
opinions and they will be
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Woo.
Wow. So I resonate with your experience where you said that it was kind of like God who kicked you out of church. Because I have a similar story. I felt like that it was Jesus in the parking lot, like outside of our church. But what I'm understanding now is what I heard was spirit was actually my higher self yelling to me, get out, come outside, come out, come outside.
There's so much more outside, like so much more.
Yeah. So for them to give you that award um at that particular time, that must have been so, did you cry? That must have been
Oh,
so
yeah, I
poignant.
did. I really did. I'm like, thank you. And my voice is all like cracking because one, it was an honor, but it was also a heartbreak because that solidified that I was leaving, that it was time. And I never
Mm.
wanted to leave. I
Oh,
never wanted to leave. I still don't.
yeah.
But there's no way that I can come back in
Yeah.
that same way that they want me. They will never have me the same way.
Did the
Mhm.
did
So
the kids at the time of when they gave you that award, did they know you were stepping away? Did they know you were leaving at that
Um,
time?
I don't think the youth knew.
Oh,
The youth ministers did,
oh,
or maybe the youth leaders did, but
right.
not everybody. It was
Yeah.
just like my time is done.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And it was so heartbreaking because I thought I was coming back to church and I'm gonna live my life as an old lady and have my kids involved in the church. You know, you like have this plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't turn out that way because how could I? I would betraying myself, my ancestors, the people who taught me, all my teachers. I would be betraying the legacy of Jesus as healer
Yeah.
Mm.
and rebel, right? Like I I could not.
I feel like the breakups from church feel like a breakup from a relationship, very intimate
Yes.
relationship, right? And you have to grieve that. And then leaving the youth, it sounds like you're leaving like,
Your
you know,
kids.
the family, right? Breaking up
Like,
with it's not just the person, it's the family as well. And
Yeah.
that's heartbreaking. So when you left the church and you're like, I need to start coming into the decolonizing work, what is your connection to the word decolonizing and what does that look like now for you?
it's heck of funny. Decolonizing for me is grief work. It's shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always good with the shadow work in you with different language within the church. That was always my thing. Um, so decolonizing for me was a grieving and the examining of all those things that we talked about, right? And an unlearning and an undoing of myself and learning one who I really am. Like I wasn't just if you believe in past lives or past life regressions, like I've been here many times before,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I've gotten farther this time.
Yeah,
Mm.
I feel that. Yep.
Um, and that this is the time for these changes. This is the
Yeah.
time for accountability. I mean, if you follow astrology, that even says this is the time right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Got goosebumps.
Calling in my ancestors through that healing process because I'm like, I'm gonna need all the help. So if ancestors, you're really present, you need to show up. And they did. I've
Yeah.
like met teachers through
Yeah.
meditation and people in my lineage who say I will never find them on paper because of the guilt and shame and colonization, that was that connection, that lineage was erased.
Yeah.
But we can still call on our ancestors even if we don't know them by name.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know them by name, but they know me by spirit,
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep.
and that will never change. And there's a lot, you know, in 2020 we still have yet to grieve and process. It was the collective trauma and
Yeah.
grief as we are experiencing now with Palestine.
Yep.
um, Being Filipino and having, you know, I do have a lot of family in the medical field and what that meant for us or what it possibly could mean for our family, and the mental health impacts of all of that. And on top of that, inflation, where these systems are trying to very hard dysregulate us. It's not by mistake. We went through this great resignation because lockdown forced us to sit with ourselves and
Yeah.
reevaluate what we
Yeah.
deserve of this world. And what this world tells us is not so. We
Yeah.
deserve more than what these people are willing to put out.
Yeah. I think what comes through what you're saying is, you know, change starts with awareness and 2020, I have multiple conversations about 2020 being a portal.
Portal.
The collective, you talked about collective grief and me as like an energy relational student practitioner, you know, coming emerging into that. I've been contemplating and reflecting on how it's ironic how is a coronavirus and the corona is like the crown, right, of our energy systems. It's because 19 was involved it affected the lungs, right? And what do they
Mm,
say about grief in the body? It's in the lungs, it's in the airways,
Woo!
right? So, and just like any health, someone who's been grappling with, you know, health, I've been since my own health crisis or whatever you call it. I'm cured, claim that. Um, it does start with awareness. People have to start knowing, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something there's dis-ease here. And I
Mm-hmm.
think part of the grief collective is realizing systems are very corrupt. They're not sustainable. We are in late state capitalism. I I think the whole world got an germ 101, like dang, germs are everywhere. Like it's just been such a time to I have a molecular cellular bio background. So I was already walking around after I took virology, like in my undergrad, I was like, ugh. So I always had sanitation with spray with me, right? But then when COVID happened, I was like, well, the whole world, I was like, wow, like if whether whatever profession so removed from science, there's no way it's undeniable. You had to know about health, you had to know about a pandemic. And so I think from the macrocosm to the microcosm, everybody was
Yeah.
confronted with there's something wrong and we have to shift things, or we're going to choose to, I don't know, stay blue pilled and just you know what I mean, like just be ignorant. So I think at this point in 2024, there is a level of um, like complicit choice people are having, or you are part of the paradigm. And I think that's what this new earth conversation, I think, is
Yes.
coming to. So
Age of
that's what I want to.
Aquarius. Age of
age,
Aquarius.
age of Aquarius, age of accountability. We have to call it out
Mm-hmm.
before something can be removed of the dis-ease. We to bring the ease back in, we have to move the dis-ease, right? We have to call it, we have to name it, reflect on it, and let it go, or move the paradigm towards the direction we want.
And I'm gonna say something for the people who are listening. If you're doing your healing work, your ancestral healing work, your lineage work, I mean, mentioned, the shame sometimes of being complicit in these systems. But one, let's acknowledge we were born into these systems, and that this shame is not ours to carry.
Yeah.
It was
Yes.
not
Yes.
our generation, at least for us as Filipinos. It was not our initiation that we had inherited this, and now we have to feel it because it wasn't. But also that we can lay that down when we're ready, that we don't have to carry that with us. I think also the Christian conditioning tells us to pick up our cross and
Yeah.
and take that baggage with you.
I
Like
Yeah.
love you saying Christian
that shit
conditioning.
I did not
Yes.
start,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't have to carry it. And I will, and I'm just, this is an invitation that you can lay that down when
Mm.
you're,
Mm.
and pick up
Yeah.
something new.
Mm. I had a question. You mentioned that you were part of maybe like Pentecostal charismatic movements, and so was I. So, um, I guess my question is, how did your relationship to spirit evolve after you left the church, and were you able to I know that there are people who have left the church and they're like, it's all fake, that all that was fake, all of it was emotionally manipulative, and so, like, did you struggle with that? Did you struggle with, whoa, what was real or what was not? What was I like, you know?
That's only someone a charismatic could could ask me, like, because a lot of people haven't asked me that. And
Mhm.
that is also another thing I had to examine. So what was real? Because I know I have my connection to spirit intact, and I experienced a lot of things. So
Yeah.
what? What was the spiritual warfare? What was I seeing? I was like, I've been in situations
Ah.
where I've seen exorcisms, right? So
Wow.
tell me, like, was that all fake? Were they just all actors in on it? But they weren't. I know that what I saw was real, but why, right? So part of my work
Mhm.
is understanding energy and understanding, discerning energy, but also understanding the laws of metaphysics.
Mm.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
main one that I always like to use in this realm is that you get what you focus on. So my training was you go rebuke the devil. So
Yes.
you go away. But you know what you get? You focus on the devil. Guess what you
You
make more of?
you get the
And
devil.
so we manifest these situations in some ways.
Yes.
And how we manifest
Come
that,
on.
if there's an unhealed part of someone that's holding on to guilt and shame, you can literally energetically manipulate that Because in the charismatic community, in the spiritual community,
Yeah.
words are spells. So if I say I cast you in the name of Jesus, da da da, and we rebuke that sin, you are no longer sin. But I keep talking about the sin. Guess what? I'm pulling up. I'm
Listen.
pulling up the sin. But when I got in those situations that look like exorcism type situations, what my spirit was called to do was speak love and truth in the situation. And it went against all the training that the elders told me to do. And that's when that person came to themselves. I didn't have to talk about no devil. I didn't have to rebuke nobody. I just had to I had to remind them that they were divine and that they were loved. Those are the two
Woo!
main things. And when I say love is your spiritual protection, it's not fluffy shit. Like
Yeah.
that is the realest truth.
Woo!
That's how I make sense of that now. Like
Yeah.
knowing, understanding the laws of metaphysics
Mhm.
helped me process what was going on in the charismatic spaces. And if you are a white supremacist using that shit is dangerous as fuck.
Yep.
So, you were shaking. You were agreeing. So you've seen exorcisms too?
Oh yeah, I was part of the we didn't call it exorcisms, it was deliverance. I was part of the deliverance team. And so yeah, I've seen what would be considered, exorcisms in the Catholic Church, like you call a spirit out or demon out of somebody and the person starts,
Like
the drama happens,
the drama.
yeah, like I've experienced some people like speaking in different voices just out of the blue. And so, there are a lot of things that happened that I look back now and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that was real. I called it something else."
Yeah.
But what I know it now as is just intuition, a connection with ancestors, a connection to my higher self. So, yeah, I'd be rebuking the devil too. um, so yeah.
Do you ever both feel like, was there ever a time after that situations you felt those, like, that energy, like, follow you home, or like the next day or something?
Yes.
And how did
That's why
you, like, take care? I'm curious. That's all.
no one taught me how to take care of that. I had to go outside of the church for that. And I
Hmm.
finally understand now why it is, but I find it also very spiritually irresponsible
Um,
of church leadership to allow people to engage in that and not know how to fully protect yourself.
Ooh,
They will say
yes.
you protect yourself with the blood of Jesus. Like what? They have to really sit and think about even the history and implications of what that means. Protect yourself with the blood of Jesus, with the blood of a murdered man, someone who was murdered by the state is not holy. Um, that holds really bad energetics. So yeah, I did have a lot of spiritual attacks afterwards, and that's why I stopped deliverance ministry because I knew I wanted to have a family, and I knew I wouldn't know
ooh,
how to protect my kids from that if I ever brought something home. And so I said, I'm going to put a pin on that and I'm going to come back to this. So now where I am, I fully understand that. I fully understand. I know how. And that's what I do in my current offerings.
yes, yeah. Just I want to get to your current offerings, but just to answer your question, Sissy, about how, like, if anything followed me home, I think um what that what I learned even back then was that one, I am very protected. I am just very my I don't know, my ancestors, my guides, they just protect me from stuff that I look back and I'm like, whoa, that should have
Yeah.
been really bad. That was a close
Yeah.
call. And I
Yeah.
learned that my voice is powerful. So
Yeah.
if I did feel anything, I would literally speak out loud and be like, go away. This is not your house. You don't live here, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. I had
Mhm.
some in when my kids were younger, there was some weird stuff happening, energies that I felt, what I know now is the term energies. Back then, it was just like demons or spirits. And I would just speak. I would just speak and I would feel things like just clear,
Nowhere.
right?
Yeah.
So I understand looking back now that that was all me, you know. I gave my power away to God, like, oh, that was God, that was spirit, that was Jesus. No, that was actually me. So, um, and
Learn yourself.
then um I I would pray around the perimeter of our like house, which I mean, I do now, you
Yeah.
know, but
Yeah.
in a different way for the intention of protection. So,
Yeah.
um yeah, so there was that.
Intention of protection.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, and it's so funny in not funny ways that this is considered like bruja work. When so, in speaking of rituals, as y'all's left, you were in the church for some time. You're like spirit moved you and was like, this is not aligned. You left. And church, as we know, is organized religion. There's things, rituals. There's things that we do. So, how do you? And Sissy and I have talked about this, and feel free to chime in. But Trina, what rituals do you practice now, and how do you connect with spirit? You've talked about it briefly, but like,
Um, Connecting with spirit has never really changed. I mean, I was even though I grew up in the Catholic Church, again, like I came from a CNE type family, right? So, um, tradition was never like super rooted in me. Like rosary, I'll do it with folks, but that was never like my choice of like connection, and things like that. My choice was always just like having a conversation.
mm,
Like I'm
Yeah.
if 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 prayer is a conversation with your higher beings or being, I'm in constant prayer. That
Mhm.
means I'm in constant protection.
Yeah.
Like I'm if for me, my intuition, my higher self, my connection with spirit, my connection with my ancestors are coming from the same place, a good place, a place of love.
Yeah.
mm,
I'm always in connection. I'm never not connected. And that's something I was not fully, it was hard to teach in the church because they teach disconnection,
Mhm.
um, from your voice. They
Mhm.
say hear from God, but not you, right? But your voice comes from God. So
Mhm.
how can we ever think that disconnection would lead you to God,
Yeah.
right? So for me, I'm calling on my ancestors all the time and asking them for guidance. And it has
mm,
opened up, right? Like I we can have one God, but like why not have a spiritual team? Life is already hard. Why make it harder? Right?
Right.
Do all the things for also for me is being in nature. So animism kind of supports that for me. Um, but also that means the stars.
Yes.
That also means the stars. And
Yes.
if I mean I think I hold there are some truths within crystals, right? So that's also an avenue folks can explore. Energy healing has always been a part of charismatic work. I
Mhm.
still hold on to that.
Mhm.
I used to do like space blessings, so spatial cleansings.
yes,
That
yes,
comes with the territory. Like I do that every so often, new moon, full moon. What you want to release and what you want to bring into your space.
Mhm.
mm-hmm.
Even divination tools. I will say this in all modalities, all tools, make sure you click with the practitioner because you will take on their energy. So if
Mm-hmm.
you are like, oh, I want to do Reiki, and you just choose anybody, like, how do you know they're spiritually grounded? What is the
Mm.
process behind the scenes? Like, you have to really know who you're
Yeah,
learning, who you're taking from,
facts.
right? If that
Yeah,
energy doesn't feel right, you got to trust that. I had
yeah.
to just say that as a disclaimer because so many people engage in the spiritual realm thinking it's all the same and it's not.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I think that's also a marker of a real ass healer, y'all, because the healer will tell you, I might not be for you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you need to find
Yeah.
someone that
Yeah.
you feel connected to. Because it does take time for us to, healers, we have to be clean and clear and, energetically. And that's a tangent for another day about
Yeah.
energy. I feel like we could totally talk about that. But
Yeah.
yes, I love that. Crystals, the stars, words, prayer. So
Yeah, this has been a great conversation, and I feel I've been holding back all of my like questions and stories. So but
yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time. So before we wrap it up, I wanted to invite you to tell everyone about your offerings and what you're doing now, how people can connect with you, etc.
So I have two offerings on the table right now, all like divinely, spiritually guided because Spirit said it was time. So the first one I'm doing is one, I really hated Lent being in the church. It just felt like a 40-day funeral when like Jesus wasn't even dead yet. Like that, like Jesus died. The last 3 days of Lent is like death, but like we are already mourning his death for the day one. I'm like, damn, I hate Lent.
That's
I also
perspective.
think
Yeah.
Catholics, first of all, Muslims will put Catholic fasting to shame. Like Catholics are, I'm gonna give up
Big
chocolate.
facts.
Like,
Yep. Oh my
first
god.
of all, y'all need to just find a new
If you're
practice.
gonna be crying about not being able to eat meat on Friday, I can't
Like,
go
good,
without beef or chicken. Like, boy,
right?
you better realize some people are not eating or drinking for 40
And
days.
so I
Shame.
was just like, I need to do something for Lent. We need to do something for Lent. So, I talk a lot about like there are not a lot of spaces by design where we can ask questions and examine systems and tradition and these teachings. How do we reconcile these things in us that we know are not sitting right, but we don't have the language around? I've always found that it was in community. It was community that helped me put my
Yeah.
language
Yeah.
and processing my experience, right? So I was like, okay, we need a community space for decolonizing Lent. So I do that every Thursdays, virtually on Zoom, 6:30 Pacific time. Find me on Instagram and you can register. The link is on my Instagram. But that's where we start. I start taking themes of Lent, like almsgiving and forgiveness and all these like fluffy things that we are kind of familiar with, but dismantling them. Like,
Yeah.
who does that serve in the systems? But does this still serve you? What are your questions around it? What never really sit right with you? And just gets people to like just air what's in their head because people are holding all these things and are not sure what to do with it.
Mhm.
Um, and when I was a minister, there were people that talked about the hypocrisy of the church, and I was still able to like reconcile in that in my head, but I wasn't sitting with a person who was trying to get guidance on that because I wasn't equipped at that time to do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now here I am and I'm like, well, I know enough to start picking this apart. So I find it silly that European folks brought Christianity around the world when the truth is right in there for our liberation. It is in there
Mm.
if you're teaching it right, if you're not
Mm.
using it for empire. The key is in there. So one thing we're not going to do is use the Bible as a weapon. And I think
Woo.
that this has a bigger picture impact. If we can dismantle or de-weaponize the Bible, right? Then these Christian nationalists, everything falls.
Mm.
It exposes them for who they really are. And
Mm.
we're going to need that. We're in an election year and trust that they're going to come out with this spewing hate and trying to push out policies. They're already doing it.
Yeah, you're
So
already.
Yeah.
if you are a Christian, Catholic, or not, it is still our responsibility to each other to understand this.
Call to action, y'all. So
Um,
Trina has a community she's forming. She's also can be found on Instagram. We'll drop her handle in the description below. Um, I know Amy, you said you have questions, but as a I don't really ascribe to feminist. I'm a feminism. I see the essence of it, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you both what are your thoughts on Mary Magdalene, because you both studied the Bible and scripture. And I know we have just a few more minutes left, but like in the sake of like the next 3 or 5 minutes, who is Mary Magdalene to both of you?
I'll go first because my answer's short. I'm just now kind of feeling called to figure that out, who Mary Magdalene was, because she was very hidden to me. I was taught that she was a prostitute, you know? And so because of that, it automatically, you just don't even, there's nothing there, you know? You kind of, I have block it out. Oh, she was less than Jesus, you know, Jesus, you know, it blessed her with, you know, and the whole thing. So yeah, that's my answer. I'm just now kind of learning about
Okay.
her, and I feel like I probably will have more repentance to do after I learn some things. I'll be like, oh no.
Yeah.
I think one, what can we trust about a patriarchal text to
Mm,
tell us about women?
mm-hmm.
So whatever you need to know about Mary is not in it's not in the Bible.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the other thing is I look at history, right? We know that it is a patriarchal thing, but also I don't know if history will tell us who she is. There are lots
Mm,
of theories
Yeah.
that she was his wife.
Yeah.
Um,
right.
the things, and I will not discredit that. I won't discount that, because what would it mean if Jesus had a child and had a family? His lineage continues. And part of the reason why Jesus was such an enemy to the Roman Catholic Church, or not the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire, I'm sorry, the Roman Empire, but see, you make the connection there. Roman,
Mm-hmm.
the same. Um, he, part of, lots of people in the Bible, Jesus always said, I am who you say I am. He never really answered their question
Woo.
up front. So whoever you think I am, that's what I am. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm a heathen, fine. If I'm your king, fine. If I'm your enemy, fine. And that's
Mm.
kind of what I never fully understood that until I left the church. Because
Mm,
I understood when I left the church, a lot of people are going to see me differently.
Yes.
And I
mm,
am whoever the fuck you say I am, but that has nothing to do with me and has everything to do with you.
mm.
Right. So if people said that Mary was a hoe, well, that has a lot to do with you and nothing to do with her.
Oh, oh.
If, but the implications of Jesus having a potential family means that his lineage continues. There's a royal lineage that has continued, which also means that would be a threat to the Roman state. And that would mean they would have challengers. So for someone to cover up would either be for protection of that lineage or to lie about it to protect power, right? Either
Yep.
way,
Either
it
way.
ain't really none of my business because I'm
Yeah.
going to do what I need to do.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it so much. I'm just throw out Da Vinci Code real quick. That's just a seed. I'm not saying it's facts, but it's out there. And someone channeled it from somewhere. But I so loved both your answers. I mean, I think that speaks to the array of just inviting people who are listening. Mary, who was Mary Magdalene, and there are rumors that she also had her own gospels, but they were obviously burned or not printed.
Yep.
And we'll just leave it at that for the sake of quote time. Um,
Yeah.
but is there anything that you want to say or ask Sassy, Trina, as we close up and wrap up today's hot take?
I guess my one question would be, what would you say to someone who is struggling with faith or has just left the church and
Good
is
one.
like, now what?
Go to therapy and find your people.
Yes.
Go to therapy and find your people, because healing, especially decolonizing or deconstructing from faith, you cannot do it alone because you got in it with people and you got to get out of it with
Woo, big
people.
facts.
Let's go. Yes, 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 and yes. Well, thank you so much for your time, Trina. This has been really amazing. Make sure you go follow Trina and take a look at her offerings. I don't, should we usually sometimes we close with prayer? I feel like we need to close with
We
prayer.
definitely do.
You know,
Um,
Can we invite you to close it out?
yeah.
What do you
Would
think? Would
me?
you? Yeah.
Would you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, we can totally do that. But first, I want to thank you too for holding the space and keep doing what you're doing, because actually listening to a lot of your things has helped me in my healing.
Mm.
And it has held up the mirror to remind me who I am in this time, and who we are all in this time, what we're called to do. Like, this is part of the liberation work that we're
Yes.
talking
Yes.
in the remembering. So I want to thank you guys for doing your work, and I love watching your friendship. I love it.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank
All
you.
right, but let's go ahead and get in prayer. We're going to jump into this and just call upon our most benevolent ancestors, spirit, the universe, all that is good, and all that comes from love, to fill up this space where no wrong, no evil can even approach. There's a lot we will be facing throughout the week, throughout this year, and beyond. And we just call on the strength of our ancestors to remind us who the fuck we are.
Mm.
And we call on that power to allow us to step into our purpose work deeper and more unapologetically, because we were born for this time. And I want to just give thanks and praise to all our guides that allow us to be here and to connect and guide us to the right people at the right places and at the right time, because this is the time. This is the time to do something big and just move in us in a mighty way. And we send our prayers up in flight, trusting, knowing that this prayer has been heard. And so it is.
And so it is.
Yes.
Woo, I haven't
Aw.
cried in a prayer in so long. So thank you. That was healing on
The
a level.
water. Oh, the y'all water signs. I love it.